elements, and we also analyze the different characteristics. And in the third session, we analyzed the development. We analyzed this general framework of Eval and the different elements that it considers regarding the operation of a process evaluation. And the aim was to understand how this is carried out in a process proposed by the state. So of course there are many ways to do this, but I just wanted to mention this. And now we have this last session, and this has to do with the elements to analyze the information
You are
collected
currently the only person in this
and some
conference.
key elements for the evaluation report. So let's say that this is the last stage to understand the implementation of a program. And I think that this is also a great time, a great moment to tell you that, just as we mentioned in session 3, we have a set of resources, web pages that are really, really helpful. And at the end, they provide information regarding different cases, guidelines for process evaluations, the structure, and this includes a set of resources and elements that I have prepared for you, and we are going to add this in the platform, in the educational resources area, so that you can analyze this material. And this has to do with international organisms, such as the United Nations program. And this is going to be very helpful. You can use this as a reference. We also included some non-government bodies. There is a web page that has a lot of resources, and it provides many examples to be able to analyze the questions that you have to make and how we can process this information. So we have a lot of information that we can use. So there's also a document that has to do with process evaluation to decrease tobacco smokers. And this is a very, very good document because this includes the information of a process evaluation, and it also includes the findings and what happened in the process evaluation, and it also includes recommendations. So I really hope that you use this and that it is useful. These are very general documents to analyze any dimension of the public policy, and they are also very specific so that you can keep up with a process evaluation. If you have any question or doubt, please contact me and we can work together, but you're going to have different examples and different cases regarding the follow-up of a process evaluation. So you are going to be able to find this in the platform. We have links and electronic documents. So I really hope that you find this very useful and you can use this. So I wanted to add this so that you can remember that you can check this platform. And so let's start. In this session, what we're going to review. First, we are going to analyze what happened in session 1, some of the elements or key elements in the previous session, so that we can include this in this last session. And also to analyze data, you might be asking yourself, okay, what are these subjects? But I want to mention something that is very important regarding the practical matter. So when you are conducting a process evaluation, you have to include certain elements, and these are the elements included after session 3. We have data security. We need to know how to manage this, how we're going to clean databases, how we're going to structure and guarantee that the information
You
is
are currently
that
the
we can
only
work
person
with
in this
this
conference.
information, and also how we can analyze this, the strategies, the different tools to consider. And last but not least, we are going to have some key elements to conduct the evaluation report. So it happens a lot that we have a lot of information, and it is sometimes really hard to understand how to use this information. And sometimes we do not focus on what we have to highlight for the decision makers in the report. So this is not a like a grammar rule. This is not a something like that, but these are the elements that you have to remember to be able to convey the message to the decision makers. This is something very important. Convey the message and guarantee that the decision makers find the report interesting. Otherwise, it would not be useful to conduct a report. So if you agree with these topics, I am going to move forward. If you want to add something, please let me know. Just write it in the chat. So let's start. So what happened in session 3? This is a brief summary. As you might remember, in the last session on Monday, we talked about the things that could go wrong in a process evaluation, what could fail. And as Morphy says, if something can fail, it is going to fail. So I just want you to understand that there are some things that could go wrong, and you can avoid these problems. So in this recap, we said that maybe something can go wrong before, during, and after data collection. Therefore, it is very important before you start collecting data. You have to understand the expectations of the administrators regarding this evaluation. Also, it is very important to test, to conduct pilot tests, to guarantee that the elements, the interviews, and everything that we are using, we need to guarantee that we're collecting the right information. And once we did this, it is also very important to train the data collectors. Maybe you are not going to be able to go to the field to collect the information regarding all the processes, but you need to have a trustworthy and reliable team. And this team needs to collect the necessary information. So please take this into account. You need to take the necessary time to be able to test the instruments and to train the team. And during data collection, you have to analyze the information that you're going to collect. Do not make the mistake. For instance, when you are there, you start thinking that maybe it is going to be better if you have all the information and then you're going to see what you're going to do after. You need to have a clear goal. You do not need a lot of information. You just need the necessary information that is going to help you to conduct your process evaluation. And something else that could go wrong during data collection is not understanding the processes and the conceptualization of the program. So this would mean that we would be focusing on other things. And also a third element has to do with not taking, for instance, if we are not taking into account that many things that can change due to the nature of each participant or other variables that influence on the participant's behavior. So after data collection, and this has to do with analysis, there are some mistakes where evaluators take into account average results and they lose sight of the disaggregated results or data that give information and that provide context for the process evaluation. So you need to take into account everything else and not only the average results, and make sure that these are situations that explain a variable. Something that you also need to avoid is not reviewing the preliminary findings with those in charge of the programs. You need to guarantee that the interpretation of the data is related to the nature of the program. You need to make sure that they are understanding everything and the data, and also make sure that that the conclusions are backed up with specific data. You have to have clear evidence to support this data. So in session 3, these are some of the elements, and there are some things that could go wrong, and you need to be ready to face this. And also we talked about the sequence for a process evaluation. So remember that process evaluation answers the question of how the program is being implemented, how it is working. So this evaluation aims at contrasting what is planned and what is being carried out. So in a process evaluation, the first thing that you have to do is understand the change logic, so that in the second element we can analyze what is actually being carried out. So in the third stage, we need to contrast what was planned and what is really being done. And we also have to analyze the causes and consequences of the differences between what was expected in the planning or standard and the actual implementation of the program. So this difference has to be very clear, and we also need to talk about the effects that this could cause. And we need to analyze everything that is going wrong, but we also need to have proposals and to solve, and we also need courses of action to be able to improve. And we need to analyze how this would be implemented. Of course, this is not just about explaining every single step for the team, but we also need to provide enough information for the decision makers to have a course of action. And lastly, we in session 3, we talked about the process, the logic process of Coneval to evaluate processes. And there is a section that has to do with making a judgment regarding the planning of the program. There is another section that has to do with the instruments and dissemination, for instance, calls, how the possible beneficiaries were aware of this program. There is another session that has to do with support requests, the different requirements that they have to meet. A fourth section or part has to do with the beneficiary selection, what is taken into account, and the process. Another important part has to do with goods and services production and assessing how this is done. Also, the goods and services distribution, how they reach the beneficiaries, and also how we monitor a support delivery and how we follow up on beneficiaries and support monitoring. So to recap, Coneval in Mexico follows up on every single stage in a program implementation, and with this it makes a judgment regarding the performance and the processes. So let's remember that in many other contexts, this kind of evaluation has to do with the moment or the time in which it happens. So this can also be known as intermediate evaluation or midterm evaluation, taking into account that this is an ex ante evaluation or ex post evaluation. This would be something related to the results. And this process evaluation happens in a specific period where we can monitor what is going on, and we also can implement actions to improve. So these stages are already prepared to be able to analyze the program and the different stages, and also to have courses of action to improve the operation. So far regarding the recap, and taking this into account, what we have to consider is that we already have this information and this data. So we have already enough information regarding planning, dissemination, beneficiary selection, delivery, production of goods and services, delivery, distribution, and monitoring. So we already concluded this stage regarding the field work. So what happens next? We have a lot of interviews, we have a lot of focus groups, we have structured observation regarding the processes, we analyzed the regulatory documents. So what do we do with this? What happens next? And this is something very important that I want to explain. And this has to do with data security and the security of the information that we have collected. Because we have to remember that we have sensitive information regarding people, regarding the work of, regarding the beneficiaries and the processes. So, what do we have to do? Here are some questions that I want to explain. So, what I want to achieve is that you might answer these different questions regarding the different types of interventions and the different types of programs that you might be evaluating, not only regarding the processes, this would also be for impact, design, strategy, amongst others. So you have to remember that you can identify the participants and identify the implementators. So we do need to talk with the evaluating team, and we need to ask ourselves, for instance, where should we store the data? For instance, if you have audios of the interviews conducted, databases, for instance, audios and transcripts of focus groups and interviews, and you also have the register of the observations that you have. So where are you going to save this? In which computer? Where is it located? Is the computer protected by what mechanisms? So you might also ask if you need to have a security backup. For instance, if it is in a laptop, what happens if this laptop is lost, or if the data are lost? So you need to have a security backup, and also not only one, you must have several backups. But also remember that if you have several backups, you need to guarantee that this security data are safe. So a backup mechanism needs to be secure, and you need to guarantee its security. There is a comment, although it doesn't have to do with process evaluation. Could it be possible that you have some impact results, or this is not possible because this is not designed in this way? I think that this is a very interesting question, and actually you are answering yourself. So in a methodological point of view, this is not designed to provide impact results. So as you might remember, an impact evaluation, the answer that this evaluation the question that this evaluation asks is, what would have happened if the program did not exist? So we're talking about some results that have to do with the intervention or action, and therefore we have a population that is very, very similar to the beneficiary population that did not receive the intervention. And we are monitoring this population and following up on this population so that we can understand how it would have behaved if it did not receive the program. So from a methodological point of view, this is something very different from a process evaluation. So actually, a process evaluation might give us some hints regarding the impact, but this will not have to do with information that will have a technical validity to be associated with the effects of the program. So this is not possible. Of course, this can provide information regarding some results, and I am going to clarify something regarding impact and results. A results evaluation will provide information on the accomplishment of the objectives of a program. For instance, if it achieved the goals of the beneficiaries, if it transferred the resources that it said it would deliver, if it conducted the number of trainings, if the number of vaccines was delivered, if it delivered the materials for the construction. So this is a results evaluation. This has to do with the report of a results evaluation. So in an impact evaluation, what we want to know is if there was a transformation regarding the behavior. if the public problem was modified and addressed. So in that sense, a results evaluation is different from an impact evaluation. In an impact evaluation, we want to know the effects in the behavior of the beneficiaries, and in the results, this evaluation has to do with the objectives of the program. So trying to answer your question, a process evaluation will not provide information regarding the impact evaluation. This could include information regarding some results or the possibility to achieve some results, but a process evaluation can provide information regarding, for instance, if you are on the right way, in the right way, if the theory of change is implemented in a right way, then you are going to achieve the impact. But if this is not implemented in a right way, you can already know that there are not going to be any impacts because the implementation is not happening in the right way. I do not know if this was clear. I really hope I answered your question. Right now, I am going to turn off the camera so that we have a better connection. But please, I am here. Just know that I am here. Talking about data, you already have this information that you already collected in fieldwork, and it is very important that you talk with your team so that you can make decisions regarding the data. Where are you going to save the data? What type of security are you going to include? A very common question has to do with, okay, do I have to save this in the cloud? Can it be a safe resource? Can it be reliable? We also need to understand that we need to guarantee the security of the data and to analyze who is going to access and to manage data. How are we going to protect data? Are we going to encrypt, for instance, the identity of the participants in the evaluation? Which ones are encrypted? Which ones are not? Which ones do have a password? Who has access to these passwords? So ask yourselves what constitutes a sensitive evaluation. In the following slide, we're going to talk about the different types of data, but you need to identify the information that is confidential and the information that should be protected to guarantee the reliability of the participants in the evaluation and also in the program, because maybe some of the beneficiaries and the identification of the beneficiaries is a sensitive data. So if you are saving data that maybe has a lot of users, then you need to ask yourselves, how are you going to keep the data? For instance, in a process evaluation that we conducted, we had decision makers, school education. We had 5 states, one in the north, one in the south, northeast, southeast, and in the center. So if we said, okay, this is the education ministry in the north, this was something really easy to understand because there was only one state in the north of the country. So I was just trying to protect his or her identity. But if I only said, okay, so he is from the north state, this can be really easy to know who he or she is. So we said, okay, education minister of state A, state B, state C, D. We added some letters, and the one who was in charge of the evaluation had an identification paper to know who was the minister of state A, state B, state C, and so on. So this is what we did with each one of the identities, and we decided that only one person would have this as a file with password. So that's what I mean by identification data. We cannot lose. We need to know who is who, but we also need to be very clear, and we need to understand that this can be sensitive information, and therefore it has to be identified by some people in the project. So another question that you need to ask yourselves is, can I share data with whoever requests them? This here it says this means the data regarding the confidentiality, for instance, people who were not identified in the project. Instead, another name or identification code was used. But if someone requests this, can you share this information? You need to make decisions regarding this. I do not know if maybe you have found yourselves in a problem, in a similar problem. And what do I mean by this? This has to do with the following question: how do we deliver data for audit issues? I am going to give you an example. For instance, you assessed a
You are currently
public
the only
program,
person in this
and
conference.
there is an audit in the public program, and then they ask, okay, what happened with the results of this evaluation? And they ask a lot of information with the objective of conducting the audit and making sure that everything happens as expected. And the audit asks the program to deliver databases. So can we do this? Is this possible? What do we have to do to do this? So this is something that happened to us. And someone in the team said, okay, yes, let's deliver the database with the names of the participants and the identification data, but let's deliver this in an encrypted way so that the audit cannot open this. They already know that it is there, but they cannot open this. So this might seem as a good idea, but then we realized that if we did this, although it were encrypted, the participants in the evaluation wouldn't know that it was encrypted. So how do we guarantee that the data was actually encrypted? How do we manage this? And in that sense, the beneficiaries did not open it and wouldn't know this. They would only know that we delivered this data. So we decided not to share this information, and we issued a letter, and we said we are not going to be able to deliver this data and provide this information. So these are mechanisms that we have to discuss, but it is very important to do this because otherwise you can risk the ethics of the data. And we also need to ask ourselves what constitutes a secure channel to transfer data. Can we upload this? Can we use WeTransfer? Can we use Dropbox? How are we going to interchange information? So to exchange information. So these are mechanisms that we have to analyze. We need to take to analyze this. So we have a classification regarding the different data types. This is a classification regarding the Harvard data management, and this gives us an idea of how we can classify information. So first, we have sensitive information, for instance, information that could cause serious damage to individuals or to the workplace if it were disclosed. As an example, we can think of databases of those who are sick, for instance. And of course, we do not want to disclose information regarding this information. As an example, we're, for instance, talking about HIV, the people with HIV. So we cannot disclose this information regarding the beneficiaries of the program, for instance, if they are receiving any kind of treatment. And for instance, if we have information regarding their identity, religion, political stances, and also genetic information regarding these participants. So this is sensitive information. This could cause serious damage to individuals or to the workplace if we disclose this information. Another set of information has to do with the information that is likely to cause serious damage to individuals or to the workplace if it is disclosed. Therefore, we need to keep this information and to guarantee that this information is safe. So what type of information are we talking about? Let's think about identity information, for instance, the physical status, certain preferences, how they are hired, the kind of funding that they are receiving. So, of course, we do not want to take the risk because this could cause a serious damage. This is sensitive information. A third type of information would be the type of information that is not likely to cause damage, but of course, this can also be a possibility. We, for instance, include material damage to individuals, for instance, disclosing the type of funding that they are receiving, the funders, or the resources that they are obtaining, the location of the participants, the state where they work. This could cause material damage to individuals or the workplace. And also regarding sensitive information that should not be disclosed, we have information whose disclosure would not cause material damage, but which the workplace wants to keep confidential. So this would affect the type of interaction that the participants have with other participants, and this would affect the relation with the program. So this is the information that we have to keep confidential. For instance, knowing that this was the one who provided the information, this wouldn't cause a material damage, but this would affect the relationship between the authorities or funders. For instance, if the interviewer revealed, disclosed, or it's his or her point of view, then that is information that should be kept confidential. And of course, identity, location, who said when, the job position, information that could affect his or her personal life should not be disclosed. And then we have the public information that can be disclosed and should be available for everyone. So what type of information, for instance, in an evaluation, what methods were used to obtain information regarding the evaluation? What information sources were used? If we used regulatory documents, this is not about knowing who, but this has to do with the fact that some people participated in the evaluation, the money spent for this evaluation. So this includes the information regarding the transparency of the process. So I do not know if maybe you have faced this regarding data management. So if this is something that has happened to you, please let me know. So this is sensitive information that requires conscious and deliberate decisions to be able to manage data. So you already have a lot of information that you have collected from process evaluation. So you also need to take into account how you're going to manage this information. So after data security, the sensitive information, how do we guarantee confidentiality? We are going to analyze another stage, and this has to do with data cleansing. And this means that the treatment of information that is going to allow us to work with the information. And we should be asking different questions in this stage. For instance, how do we recodify data? How are we going to separate the information in the observations? How are we going to tag each thing? How are we going to name? We also need to ask, what program do we use to analyze data? For instance, let's imagine that this is an evaluation conducted. And of course, we're going to have a lot of information. And there are some programs that can be very useful for qualitative information. We have programs such as Atlas TI that is going to help us to organize qualitative data. this program is very, very helpful. We also have in vivo and a lot of programs that we can use to process audios, videos, text. So you need to decide what you're going to use and how you're going to organize this within the program. So ask yourselves which one is the best way to prepare data before analysis. Are you going to use Word? Are you going to use Excel? Are you going to use cells, shared cells? You need to analyze the way in which you're going to structure data to for the analysis. For instance, if you're going to use PDF, maybe this is going to be really hard if you want to conduct a qualitative analysis in Excel. So you need to plan this. You need to analyze which one is the best program to process data. So also ask yourselves, how do we deal with data? What happens, for instance, if you have the birth dates of the beneficiaries, but maybe you have this in different formats. For instance, someone wrote this with numbers, someone wrote this with, for instance, the year with 4 digits and not 2. So you need to analyze how you're going to process data. Johnny says, in different countries there is different information defined by law, and the rest can be considered confidential regarding the human resource and the institution that conducts this. So do we need to have regulation regarding the confidentiality, and do we also need to implement security measures? Yes, of course, I do agree with what you say. By law, there are some things that we need to abide by law, but we also need to define the internal treatment for data. So this internal regulation is fundamental, and this has to be considered, of course, protected by law, but also by the ethical and moral implications that this information could have. So of course, this is something that must be taken into account in the team. Everyone in the team needs to know what we talk about when we talk about confidentiality and data treatment. So do not think, okay, maybe everybody thinks in the same way that I think and they are all going to protect data. No, you need to have an internal regulation. But yes, I think that this is something that needs to happen. And regarding data cleansing, we were talking about how we deal with data conflicts, how we deal information that is presented in different ways with abbreviations, for instance, and data that might seem complicated. So what do we do when this happens? This is something that we need to take into account and also make collective decisions when this happens. Another thing has to do with how do we value the missing data? What do we do? For instance, if we conduct a survey and if we decide that some of the instruments that we're going to use in process evaluation will have to do with a survey, then we need to know how we're going to do this. For instance, if you are going to conduct an online survey, you're going to use SurveyMonkey and you're going to make the survey. So if you use a tool such as SurveyMonkey, you need to decide if the participant is going to be able to leave blank fields or not. And if you make this decision, then how are we going to process the empty fields? How are we going to take this into account? Because of course, this is going to have an impact on the available information. If this is a written survey, then how are we going to process this empty spaces or fields? Because we're not going to talk about general answers if we have this lack of information. Of course, it is valid, but you need to understand and to analyze how this is going to impact your analysis. Also, you need to make decisions between we need to understand what is the best way to verify the logical coherence regarding the answers. If we're going to share this information regarding the interview and the observation, how are we going to use this in the analysis? Because we need to deliver a results report regarding this process evaluation, and this will have to have an impact for future decisions. So how are we going to how are we going to achieve this? So data cleansing and data organization is something that you have to decide and to plan with your evaluating team. This is something important. This is something that you need to consider since the very beginning. So now let's talk about data analysis. So you have the field work, you already made the necessary decisions regarding data security, you already organized data. So what are we going to do next? So let's think about the things that we could be analyzing in a process evaluation. So summarizing what we have seen in the previous sessions, when we talk about implementation, we talk about the decisions of how to deliver a benefit, who is going to receive the benefit, how are we going to do this. So if this is happening in the way in which it was planned, then we could be analyzing the structure of the organization. For instance, a diagram analyzing if the whole team or the staff is well trained to conduct its functions, if it is the necessary amount of people working. And for instance, this has happened to me in previous process evaluations, if the responsibilities are well defined, and this can be analyzed in a structure if they understand who is the one in charge. And this is something very important for a process evaluation. We can also be talking about staff training, if it is well trained, and if the training was effective. We can also analyze or develop diagrams. We can also analyze the normativity, the procedures to make decisions, and who makes decisions. We can also analyze monitoring, control, and follow-up, which systems are ready for this. And by systems, I mean information systems, but also the activities to follow up on the processes. We can analyze benefits delivery, financial resources that back up the information or that are delivered, information systems that support management from planning up to follow-up. We can also analyze coordination between programs or institutions. And this is related to the structure, which one is responsible, and many other things, but we need to analyze that we have enough information for each one of these scenarios. So what do we do with this? And it is important to highlight that process evaluation will use combined methods. And regarding what theory says, you are going to have qualitative information of what is happening. You are also going to have quantitative information, but mostly qualitative information regarding the context, the opinion or points or different points of view regarding the implementation of the program. And I think it is very important to talk about data analysis in this concept. So please check the definition in the slide. Data analysis is a process that requires smart questioning, relentless search for answers, active observation. It is a process of combining data, of making the invisible obvious, of recognizing the significance of the insignificant, of linking facts that are apparently not logically related, of fitting categories with others, and of attributing consequences to precedents. It is a process of conjecture and verification, of correction and modification, of suggestion and defense. It is a creative process of organizing data so that the analytical scheme seems obvious. So we need to intertwine a story, and we need to have a logical coherence to understand what is happening and how can we treat this. So this is the information that a good report would provide. If this is happening as it was expected, or maybe it is not, and why not, but we need to include this information. So this is an active process, a creative process. As you might know, there is not only one way to do this. We need to analyze which one is the best way to do so. So please analyze this in this way, and I want to propose some elements to analyze qualitative data. In the slide, there is a table, and we have different columns, different ways to analyze data, and they depend on the objective and what we want to address, and also the type of information that we have. For instance, there is a type of analysis regarding data, and this is known as factual. And the purpose is to summarize data in discrete forms. What do we mean by this? Well, for instance, a word count, frequency, word clouds, sets, and constructs of words. And this works if we have clear and well-defined categories, and if we have enough information so that in the frequencies, in the aggregate, or in the count, we can obtain information. So factual analysis, data analysis, provides a first approach in discrete forms and represented in numbers regarding information. So how many times was the word corruption included, for instance, or how many times was the word health included? So these are the first approaches that provide information regarding what we are doing. So we can conduct factual analysis regarding data. For instance, how many times was the word violence included when the word drugs was also included? Or how many times was the word corruption included when the word when another word was conducted? So this factual analysis helps us to make those type of associations without associating causal relationships. So we are only having some links. So far so good. Is it clear? So this is a kind of analysis. Of course, it has some advantages and some disadvantages. This provides a first approach regarding data. This provides information that the information is not going to help us to have causal links. Of course not. This only allows us to have associations with things. And another analysis mechanism is a descriptive analysis. And here we start to add more cognitive elements regarding data. And this has to do with the relationship between links and data. So we start to map these relationships. What are some of the examples regarding this type of analysis? Well, for instance, conceptual maps, stakeholders maps. So in a process evaluation, you could map the stakeholders, how they are linked between the processes, how each one is related to a single process, or how a specific process can have an impact on different kinds of processes or institutions, for instance. So it is very powerful. It is very important to have a process diagram for the stakeholders. For instance, there is a diagram that provides information on the stakeholders and which one is responsible for what or in charge of what. So this is very helpful when the information is not that visible. For instance, in this process flow map, for instance, you might have some regulatory documents or interviews, and you're trying to contrast what was planned and what is being conducted in the operation, because this is the core of process evaluation. So you might conduct a diagram, for instance, in accordance with the standard, because in accordance with the standard, this goes A, B, C, and the one who is in charge of process B is this institution. So you include this information in a diagram, but as a result of the evaluation, you realized that operation doesn't happen in this way, and maybe the process doesn't follow A, B, C. Maybe it happens in a different way, and the one who is responsible of process A is not that institution but another one. So the representation of these findings is something very helpful for an evaluation and a report. So this descriptive analysis of what is going on is a very important analysis when we do not have information that is not that visible when we want to highlight a specific subject. So everything clear so far, so good? I really hope so. So another type of data analysis has to do with hermeneutic analysis. And here we start searching for meaning, we start including the context. Thank you, Violeta, Carlos, Johnny. Thank you so much, because I know that it is really hard to understand if you are understanding everything. So hermeneutic analysis has to do with information, and we in this type of analysis we start searching for meaning, patterns, context. So this go beyond the descriptive part. We start involving stakeholders to analyze how they are understanding the program or the different processes, how they understand, for instance, the benefits, their different points of view regarding the process, to be part of the program, to fill the forms, or to provide feedback.
You are currently the only person in this
the
conference.
beneficiary's process. For instance, if something is not going in the right, is not going as expected. So as you can see, this has to do with information. We want to know about context, meaning, if we have some patterns, if there are some common topics. Johnny wants to say something, and he says, okay, so when we conduct a process in the country, there are a lot of organizations involved obtaining data regarding similar objectives. So before we analyze information, it is substantial to have a data collection system to be able to compare information. Therefore, a system should be created, because data collection affects data and the analysis So as you might imagine, this has to do with financial resources. So that this could happen, of course, this is going to be expensive. Manage data, of course, you're going to need to this is expensive. This is an investment that you have to make. Of course, this is going to help transparency, responsibility, but this has to be included in the budget of a process evaluation. So there are some mechanisms that require a lot of money, others not so much. So these are decisions that should be made regarding the results allotted. But of course, this is a very important element. Thank you, Johnny, for mentioning this. So talking about hermeneutic analysis, we have different information sources. For instance, we analyze data or narrative of an interview. We analyze regulatory documents, and we also analyze how they are used, how the participants understand them, how the ones who implement this understand them, and how the ones who obtain the benefits understand them. So this has to do with a conceptualization of the participant regarding the participants. Some of the elements that we have to take into account, for instance, the interaction between analysis and context. If we already analyzed what the standard says, but we need to understand how the operator understands the standard, and how the beneficiary understands this norm. For instance, how he or she interprets the requirements to participate. So something that is very important is how the beneficiary interprets or understands the program. If he understands how the program works, the impact, and the transformation that it wants to achieve. So hermeneutic analysis is fundamental when we are trying to analyze how the beneficiary understands the program. And last but not least, we have explanatory analysis. This goes a step beyond analysis, and this aims at understanding causal relationships, and this aims at proving from the qualitative aspect the logic that conducts or that leads to changes. And here we talk about combinations of different associated factors, explaining the theory of change, explaining why these sequence of actions happen or why not, and it relates results, conditions, and interactions, because you're going to start associating the effects of the program, and it also aims at explaining how a specific result was obtained. So explanatory analysis involves this final result. Explanatory analysis verifies, for instance, or takes into account the final result. And it is a fundamental part also. And also, I think it is very important to add that to mention that this type of analysis has to do with impact evaluations. In impact evaluations, we have to explain why something happened and regarding the effects of the program. In a process evaluation, for instance, descriptive analysis and hermeneutic analysis are used. This will provide information regarding the things and why they are happening. So this is a very general point of view, but in a process evaluation, you are going to use the descriptive and hermeneutic analysis. Factual analysis is a very, very helpful tool because this is going to provide a general picture of what is going on, but this doesn't describe or helps us to make relationships with other variables. So let's focus on this too, but I would like to show some other examples of this type of analysis. We also talked about factual, descriptive, hermeneutic, and explanatory analysis. And it is very important that we understand how to use each one and the elements that we need to consider. In factual analysis, we need to use this type of analysis when we have data that can be quantified and frequencies, and also when we have a set of information, so that in the aggregate, that we can use this in the aggregate. Of course, we are not going to have a word count if this is only just one interview. We need to visualize that we need information to be able to have a factual analysis, or the necessary amount of information. So we do not need to use this, for instance, in focus groups or in collective constructs, or a collective idea. If a word is repeated, this doesn't mean what this represents for the collective constructs. If the word health is included, this doesn't mean that the participants are assessing health. They are just mentioning health, but this doesn't mean that they understand this or that it is a priority. So we need to be very careful regarding this type of analysis. In focus groups, we do not need to use this because this doesn't mean that if this word is included, this doesn't mean that this is a priority for the group. So we also need to be very careful regarding the frequencies and taking into account synonyms. We might have some word clouds that include synonyms, and this doesn't mean that this is going to be a contrast regarding the words. Johnny wants to say something regarding hermeneutic analysis. So he says, when the hermeneutic analysis has to do with the interpretation, this means that to conduct this, we need to have enough experience regarding the elements of the program. Therefore, not everyone can conduct this. Also, this can be very subjective. Yes, you're right. We have to be very careful, and we need to take into account that the evaluators need to understand the nature of the program, the context, And also we need to be constantly communicated with the implementing team. We need to understand that this links and the variables are right, and this is going to be confirmed by the implementing team. So keep in mind that it is very important in the different stages. We need to avoid making the mistake of talking about results without previously communicating with the implementators. We need to make sure that the variables link is the right one. So this is something that is going to help you a lot. If you talk to the team and you show them your analysis, and to be sure that it makes sense. And well, subjectivity is always going to be present also in quantitative methods, so you have to be very careful regarding the relationship that you're going to have with the information. But talking about factual analysis, we need to be very careful, because, for instance, if a word is included, or if a specific piece of information, or this will not mean that we are going to make a decision based on this. And in descriptive analysis, when do we use this and when not? When we want to describe and have information regarding different types of different types of data, when we want to describe what a data means or a context, and not only using this to draw conclusions, because this is only a description. We are not interpreting or linking causes, so we do not draw conclusions. This is only a broader picture, and we also need to be careful regarding the categories and patterns. As you might remember, in the previous slide, I said that we can use diagrams and stakeholders. So this is not useful for drawing conclusions. This is just helpful to have a specific scenario. And if we develop the wrong categories regarding the ones in charge of the processes, and then we would have the wrong information. Milton wants to add something. So, for instance, if someone is not aware with the qualitative methodologies, maybe it is helpful to mention that focus groups and interviews are the main input used in the method that you have mentioned. Yes, you are right. I want to apologize for this because I forgot to mention this. I'm really sorry, but Milton is right. In qualitative methodologies, the main strategies that are used to obtain data regarding reality are interviews, either to beneficiaries or to the implementators, focus groups, where where you interview people to be able to understand the phenomenon from a collective point of view. A group of people with similar characteristics, for instance, beneficiary women, or people who suffer from a specific disease, or people with a specific amount of income, or people who are currently implementing the program. This includes people with similar characteristics that could provide substantial information. And we can also have some observations of how the program is being conducted or implemented. And this will generate information that will be obtained from the interviews or focus groups. And this information is registered. And this set of data has to be cleaned and organized to be analyzed in the ways that I am mentioning. So yes, you are completely right, and I really want to thank you for mentioning this. So I really hope that this quick summary was clear. So what happens with hermeneutic analysis? When do we use this? When we have a lot of information sources that is going to help us to have codes and categories, and that is going to help us to classify. For instance, we can classify information regarding the problems identified by the beneficiaries in the implementation of the program, and we can classify the problems identified by the beneficiaries, or the opportunity areas, or the things that are not working. So we can have a set of categories and labels regarding the implementation of the program. So when do we not use this? Well, when we
You are
have,
currently the only person in this conference.
for instance, if we have 2 or 3 interviews, it is not helpful to have a lot of codes or categories, because the story can be told in another way. So also, if we only have surveys, remember that we need interpretation and meaning, contextualization, and with the survey information, what we can have is frequency or descriptions, but we cannot associate contexts. So we need to be really careful regarding allotting time. Of course, this is an analysis that is complicated or complex, so please take this into account and be careful. Do not make the mistake of thinking that maybe if you conduct the hermeneutic analysis of 40 interviews, 10 focus groups, 20 observations, and then you're going to be able to manage this information, because that is not going to happen. It's a lot of information to manage. And last but not least, regarding explanatory analysis, it has to do with impact evaluations, and we are associating causal relationships. So we use this when we want to link the context with the results or effects, and we use this in impact evaluations. But do not use this when the purpose is only to describe. It is very likely that the information is not going to be enough, and maybe we are going to face a more complex problem. And also, we need to be very careful when we have a logic coherence regarding causal relationships or causality. We need to have information that supports this, because this is a very, very important part. I am going to continue. So how does it happen? How the cycle happens? This is a scheme, and in the next slide, I am going to show this to explain this. So first, you have to manage data. So you have to organize and manage data. How do we structure data and organize data? How do we guarantee that it is working? We need to read and collect emerging ideas. Probably if you are working in the field, you're not going to be able to have enough information, so you need to analyze the available information to analyze. A third step regarding this cycle has to do with describing and classifying codes in topics. How are you going to classify that information? The next stage has to do with developing and assessing interpretations. How are we going to start telling the story? And this has to do with the priority that the beneficiaries, and regarding the program and the problem that they consider more important. Also, we have to represent and
You are
visualize
currently the
data.
only person in this
For instance,
conference.
we need to have graphs, diagrams, and then we need to submit the final report. So what are we talking about? Consider this 5 stages in the data cycle analysis. So how do we do this? We prepare the files. We need to guarantee the security of the data. We need to analyze the different analysis. So this is the strategy. I am going to have databases. I am going to name the files. I am going to have a security plan for the long run. So we need to consider this. I did not mention this in the security data, but for how long are you going to have this encrypted data? For how long are you going to save data? So this is something that you need to decide. Of course, maybe you're going to use a software, or are you going to do this in a written way? So you're going to start using labels or tags, or are you going to use a software, or both? But these are the kind of decisions that you have to make when you are analyzing data. Then the next cycle has to do with collecting emerging ideas. You need to take notes during reading. If you're, for instance, reviewing the transcript of the interview, if you're going to collect data, if you're going to have a summary, if you are going to take field notes, or if you're going to use schemes. And results, you have to decide if these are going to be abstracts, memos, ideas, or relations between documents. In the next stage, when we talk about describing and classifying codes and topics, keep in mind that you have to decide if you're going to have a tag per each word, per process, per idea, or if you're going to have a combination of these things. How are you going to apply the different codes? How are you going to name the codes, the category list, and the descriptions? For instance, if you decide to have a category that says critics, for instance, or reviews or comments. So what does this mean? You need to describe, and because you are going to encrypt data, you need to describe what a review or commentary or comment or critique means. And also you need to understand how a success looks like, or problems, for instance. What are you going to refer? What are you going to include in the tag? So how these codes are related to the data sources. In the next part, we also need to develop and assess interpretations. So how do we start giving place to a framework that relates some things with others? How are we going to relate codes with teams and families, for instance? We are going to analyze an example later on, but how do we organize this data in different categories and in broader relations to be able to explain the problem or implementation? So we can use theories, understanding the context, and diagrams. And last but not least, we also need to represent and visualize data. How do we develop a point or create a point of view? How we talk about causal relationships, and how do we make this with an impact? I am going to show you a scheme and an example. What I mean by codes, categories, and themes. So this is just an example regarding treatment in children with disorders caused by fetal alcohol syndrome. How do we deal with this, or how do we help these children who are suffering from fetal alcohol syndrome? So we can have a theme. For instance, how do we foster personal relationships? How do we help them to have positive relationships? And we also, if you interview many children with this syndrome, for instance, and you need to start processing this information, so you want to know regarding personal relationships. So in the categories that you're going to create are, for instance, respectful interactions and honest communication. So we can have codes, for instance, how to create a trust atmosphere, how do we present consequences of failing trust, how we develop social relationships, and how do we review evaluation reports. And honest communication has to do with reviewing evaluation reports, and we need to introduce ourselves as a multidisciplinary team. So we're talking about the fact that we have different labels or tags. We're going to have behaviors, attitudes, and strategies. How we're going to achieve that honest communication, or how can we foster honest communication? So these are the elements that are going to help us to analyze the relation between themes, categories, and codes. So this is a method of the analysis that we're going to be using for the analysis of the report. So I wanted to show you an example of how we analyze a lot of information, but because we do not have a lot of time, I am going to skip this example. If you reviewed this, I really hope that this can be understood in a clear way. And if you have any question, please let me know. But basically, the idea is to show you how to use tools or an analysis software And in this way we can process a lot of information so that we can reach conclusions regarding the point of view, the participants' point of view. I am not going to talk about this to mention these slides, but because we do not have enough time, we are going to skip these slides. So as you can see, this is one of the strategies. This was word clouds. This was the most basic one, but we already talked about the hermeneutic part. This analysis has to do with factual, descriptive, and explanatory. So I would like to talk about the evaluation report. So we already conducted the analysis, and the important part of the evaluation is to use results. We need to have results that modify the decisions of a program, and a substantial part has to do with an evaluation, an impact report that has an impact on the decisions, and this also has to have an impact on the decisions of the implementators. So I want to talk about three important things. First, the message, the audience, and the media or means. So please keep this in mind: the message, the audience, and the media. So these are the things that you have to decide. And the message is the idea that you want to convey, that the evaluators or the decision makers want to convey. So this part might be a bit obvious, but this is fundamental. The impact or the decisions are only going to transform if the decision makers read the report, and they need to read the report. And the message is only going to be delivered if you are able to convey the message, if you can include this idea in the report. And of course, you're not going to be able to express this if you do not have one. So evaluation and its analysis has to effectively convey the message, and you need to deliver the message in a way that the decision makers, in an easy way, so that they can understand this. So the report has to include recommendations and findings, always backed up by evidence. So be careful if you include something not backed up by evidence or supported. So please avoid this. Do not draw conclusions and causal relationships. This evaluation is not going to include causality. So be reasonable, be logic. The recommendation and the findings must be logic. Do not ask the program to change the president, for instance. Do not ask the program to change the constitution or something that is not able to be achieved. You need to be concise, precise. You need to be empathetic to be able to achieve feasibility, what the program can actually achieve, what it is able to achieve. And this is going to help the decision makers to be able to have these changes, to make the changes. Regarding the method, we need to describe the report. The report has to be concise, reasonable, and it has to describe, to be a comprehensive report regarding the methodological decisions, but this doesn't need to include every single stage. The reader is not doesn't need to know everything that we did, but we need to be really clear, because the methods must be clear and efficient, and everything else you can write this in the annex part. So of course we are always going to have disadvantages or limitations, and this actually strengthens the analysis. We need to be clear of what we were able to achieve and the limitations. So what happens with the audience? We need to be able to understand to whom we are delivering this report. If these are decision makers, if maybe they are going to get bored, this has to be appealing for the decision makers. So we need to have a strategy. We need to convey the idea since the very beginning, since the index actually. I am going to need 3 more minutes, just 3 more minutes. So we need to have an impact, and to be able to do this, we need to define the ones who are involved in the decisions. We need to be aware of the ones who are going to participate or who are going to read the report. And we also need to have information for everyone. I am not only talking about sections, but but I am talking about the language, the way in which we describe the report. And by media, this doesn't only mean if it is going to be digital, printed, the type of letter. No, this has to do with the structure of the report. And just think about this. For instance, sentences. The first idea in the first paragraph has to make an effect. We need to be able to include the right thought or the right idea. This has to be easy to read. Of course, it is not going to be better if it has a lot of pages. We have to convey a powerful idea. We need to do this in a successful way. The body can be used to express the evidence, pros, cons. In Mexico, we say, for instance, do not just write to fill the voids. Everything else that you need to include this in the annex part. Of course, the readers or decision makers are going to read 200 pages. You have to be concrete, precise. We need to have an executive summary. Do not have very long sentences or paragraphs. Include short paragraphs. So keep these ideas. Try to avoid long phrases or sentences. Try to include coherent sentences. Avoid technical jargon. Of course, there are some methodological things that you need to include, but avoid including a lot of technical jargon, things that are not going to be understood by the readers. Remember that we are talking about decision makers, and this is going to be easier for the reader. So use active voice, do not use passive voice. Be aware of not exceeding abbreviations or acronyms. Write the full name or phrase the first time you mention this, but after that you can use a shorter version of the name or a pronoun. And make sure that the report is going to be used. And I would like to finish. I think that this was a very quick explanation, and Milton wants
You
to
are
have
currently the only person in this
according to
conference.
criteria. So yes, in the material that you're going to receive, I am going to give you a report that has to do with tobacco smokers, and it is a very good report. I am also going to share a technical report that has a very good executive summary regarding process evaluation. This is not included in the materials, but I am going to include this in a bit. So, do you have any question, any something that you want to add? If also regarding the process evaluation, you also want to ask something, please contact me. I am going to be very happy to answer your questions or concerns. So thank you, everyone. Johnny, Milton, everyone, Carlos, Wendy, Fanny. So have a great weekend, and thank you so much for being here. Have a great day. Bye.